Thanks for watching. We have so much to talk about, and no, this time around it's not a prank. It is very much for real. I have a box to prove it. I also have a manual to prove it, and we will go over all of those things in today's video. This is the all-new Losi RZR Rey. It comes in two different colors, so you have like a Fox version that you see over here. Again, in this case, you actually see it on the box. In case you have no idea what I'm talking about, a couple of months ago, I built as like some sort of imaginary release. I built something that I wanted to have, which was a Losi Polaris RZR, which I baptized the Polaris, and you see it behind me. In the next video, I'm thinking that we're going to put the two of them side to side, see what my imagination could do, and see what the production version looks like in some more detail, because this is a really cool release. This is something that I really wanted to have. That's also the reason why I built one. Anyway, you have a Fox version and you have a blue version. The blue version is, of course, I'm not sure if you're colorblind, this is the blue version that I have in front of me over here. It looks really cool. It looks very much like Polaris RZR. So in that they have greatly succeeded. A couple of concerns I think that people have online is size, which I agree, and we're going to definitely have a good look at that. And the other one is pricing. This thing retails for $619, which is of course a lot of money, but everything has become really a lot more expensive in the past year. A lot of inflation, shipping has become exponentially more expensive. And I'm thinking of what we've seen so far, being stocked in hobby stores is a lot of stuff that happened from before of that true inflation hike. So it could be that this RZR Rey is the first sign of things to come in many aspects of the hobby, and then this being the first ready-to-run vehicle where you see it kind of reflected in the price tag. Another thing that of course helps is that this is a new licensing partner. Licensing costs money. There's a lot of licensing going on in this vehicle. Polaris, of course, but also Raceline. It has some Raceline rims. BF Goodrich. There's a ton of stuff going on that makes this more pricey than your average RC. Does that mean that you don't get value for money? I do actually think that you do get a lot of value for money with this vehicle, but I will just peel it back like an onion, show you all of the ins and outs, go over all of the novelties as well with you, so you can perhaps make up your mind yourself in seeing if it's worth it for you as well. Let's do the utterly boring stuff first, which is this radio. This is a DX3 radio. You will be familiar with this radio because this one has been around for quite some time. This one takes 4 AA batteries. I believe that my Losi Polaris also came with this radio in its imaginary version. In case you have never seen one of these, your trim switches sit in the front, your reverse switches sit on the top of the radio. There is a third channel and there is also a throttle limiter. So in case you feel brave and you want to give this to a kid to see $619 disappear into a curb or a wall, you can set it to 50% or 75%, depending on the amount of destruction that you want to witness, with a smile on your face and a tear on your cheek. And do it like that. I will keep it at 100% and I will destroy my own stuff because I'm not that brave of a man. Second thing, let's talk scale, because this thing is advertised as 10 scale. It is definitely not 10 scale. It is way bigger than that. But to determine how big it actually is, there are a few things that we need to factor in. One of them is wheelbase. So how does this compare to a full-sized Polaris RZR? Now, for that we go to the manual, flicking through it, going to the exploded views. It says something a bit curious over here. It says Losi Polaris RZR Pro R, 110 scale 4-wheel drive desert side-by-side RTR. I'm not falling over any of the 10 scale stuff that's listed over here because they list this as a 10 scale just to indicate where you can find the replacement parts. So if you want to have, for example, a new ESC, new motor, stuff like that, wheels, tires, all of those options would be listed in 10 scale. I would, however, like to see them list electronics in a different way. Perhaps A for like 5th scale stuff, and then B for like 8th scale stuff, C for 10 scale stuff, and then D for 12th scale and smaller. That would be, I think, really helpful. What I mean by that, this thing is not 10 scale. If you buy this as an accessory for example, your 10 scale range of vehicles, you will be disappointed. Not in the last place, of course, by the price tag, because you would expect this to be a small vehicle for a quite hefty price tag, but also with its sheer size. This thing falls in a completely different category. I think also with that justifying that price tag a bit more. Now, where does it fit then exactly? Because what I wanted to hint at over here is that it says that it's a Pro R. This is not a Pro R. This Polaris RZR is a Turbo R. How do I know that? Well, building the other one, I looked at like 2 million pictures on Google Images, and I can tell you that a Pro R looks very different than a Turbo R. A Turbo R in full size has a 96-inch wheelbase, where a Pro R would have a 104.5-inch wheelbase. And the majority of that wheelbase difference you find in the back. Another thing that is different between a Turbo R and a Pro R is the roll cage. The Turbo R comes with a bolt-on roll cage that is shaped exactly like the one that you see over here on the RZR Rey, and a Pro R comes with a more sloped, more aggressive styled welded roll cage. Now you might think to yourself, why is that important, all this geekiness? First of all, I hope that we will see at some point a Pro R, so I hope that this is perhaps some sort of hint dropped of things to come. Perhaps we will see a 4-seater Pro R. I think that that would be really extremely dope. And then its intended use is a bit different. So a Pro R, you would use that to run it in the dunes, to really go full pot, full throttle, do the craziest amount of stuff that you can imagine, where a Turbo R is made for some different use. Turbo R, you would take that one out in the weekend, you would put a cooler in the back with a bunch of drinks, you would put your wife next to you, and you would take this out on some technical hill climbing, stuff like that. The stuff that you see basically come by on Fail Army, with these things toppling over backwards, the cooler falling out, all of the Mountain Dew being spilled over whatever hill it was that surprised you and that you did not manage to tackle, turning your weekend adventure into this really cool tell this on Monday at the water cooler in the office type of story. I hope that makes sense. So this vehicle is different in its intended use than the Pro R. Of course, this all boils down to, where does this sit scale-wise? Is this based on the 96-inch wheelbase, or is it based on the 104.5-inch wheelbase? It is the first one. It's the 96-inch wheelbase. And with that, this gives us a scale factor of 6.71. So this is a 1:6.7 scaled vehicle. And that is terribly important, because that kind of shows you where to position this in the market. This would function really well as an accessory for example, the Axial SCX6. Now that we've tackled that, I think we can move on and look a bit closer at all of the body panels, all of the exterior features first, before we dive into the chassis and see what they've done over there. At first glance, very chunky feeling vehicle. So the majority of the weight, however, sits in the bottom. I think that's a good thing. A lot of people were a bit afraid that this thing would be top heavy, seeing that there's such an amount of plastic going on in the top with that roll cage and also with all of these interior accessories. But it does feel planted, so no worries over there. There are a limited amount of Lexan body panels. They consist of the roof, the front hood, 2 door sections, and then there's this boot lid type of encompassing part, which is also made of Lexan. Well, what about the interior, Chris? Isn't that Lexan? No, the interior is not Lexan. This is the same type of thermoformed extruded plastic that you would find in, for example, the SCX6. So this is black through and through, and this is not a paintable panel. At least it's not like a clear panel. Driver figure and passenger, they look good. They could use a tiny bit more detail, in my opinion, along with that dashboard that continues into the hood. It all looks nice. It is very much like Polaris RZR. So Polaris RZR as well has a lot of plastic going on, and you see the same thing happening over here. Easy release body system. So I do think that that's really clever thinking. So there's 2 body clips in the back, 2 body clips in the front. And if you remove those, you can take the entire cage section off. And you can also see there's a lot of webbing going on underneath that interior panel. What then stays on the chassis are the taillights, the entire luggage compartment in the back, the faux engine halves that are bolted to that chassis, and the entire front, so the headlight, the grille, all of that stuff, it all stays on the chassis. There are working lights inside of the front and the back. I don't think that those front LEDs do all that much. It is pretty easy to change these out if you want something that is a bit brighter in the dark, because this is not going to do you any favors in the dark. Wheels and tires. At first glance you might be tempted to think that these are regular short course wheels and tires, and the rim size is, so it is a 2.2 sized rim. On the outside it is 3 inches on the inside, but it is a very different tire. So this tire sits a bit taller than your average 10th scale short course tire. This is a bit comparable to, for example, the Traxxas UDR type of tire. So it's a bit taller than your 10 scale tire. You don't want to get too tall in case you do want to change these out for something else, because in the front there is a limited amount of space before this will start to rub. Quite a bit of plastic in the front, so you have this entire firewall, let's just call it that, to cover up the front to make sure there's no debris coming inside of the chassis. And you will also see that the plastic that's attached to the chassis on the sides, that's just a continuation of those front fender flares that come off with the top of the body. Same in the back over here, so these fender flares as well, they're attached to the body section that you take off in case you want to dive into it. So all of this comes off the minute you take those body clips out. Seeing that the entire body comes off makes things a lot easier in case you want to do some work on the truck. You have easy access to your steering servo, which is metal geared, waterproof. You have easy access to all of your other electronics. So over here you see the Spectrum receiver, then below that is a 130 amp Spectrum ESC that you are familiar with from, for example, the HemiStorm Rey. Also the Losi LMT came with this exact ESC, and then this is paired to a 3800 kV brushless motor. This ESC, if you have it separately, it is rated for 4S. However, they don't recommend running anything more than 3S in this truck. I guess it has to do with weight, and also you don't need any more top speed than you would be able to get right out of the box, because I think it tops out at 43 or 45 miles an hour. The RC Sailors did a video on that showing what it can do. All new lower A-arms, all new upper A-arms as well. None of them are adjustable in length, and the same goes for the steering rod. So you are left with a setup that you just have to deal with as it is. However, I don't see a lot of things wrong with it. At first glance, you might think that these shocks are all new too. I don't think that they are. I just think that the spring is new in that spring color. And apart from that, those shock bodies, they're plastic, they look familiar. Those shock caps in aluminum also look familiar. And then they have a bleeder screw, so they're really easy to set up. Moving backward, this is an all new chassis with an all-new chassis spine. So it is kind of like a sandwich type of construction. So that spine doesn't just stop at where the pivot is for the trailing arm, but it continues all the way to the back to the rear diff housing. The front and rear diff, they're identical. The diff housings, they are different. And all of this stuff is new, so none of this would carry over to, for example, the HemiStorm Rey. The same goes for the bulkhead. All of that stuff is completely new. Another thing that's new is the universals. So we're in the HemiStorm Rey, for example, you had those telescopic drive shafts that were plastic. These universals are metal. Front and back, they are also the same. So you have the same universal setup in the front as you have in the back. So you only have to carry one set of spares in case you are perhaps scared that you will bust one of them. Then the most interesting part, I think, about this new release is the rear suspension setup. So you see in the back that you have those radius arms to keep everything in check. You have that trailing arm that continues all the way up into the rim. And with that, it is an extremely scale-looking suspension setup for a side-by-side vehicle. This is also something that I could not replicate, at least not in a reasonable time frame and with reasonable means in the creation of my Losi Polaris. Seeing that right now, at least all of the parts are available to me is really cool. If you want to have a closer look at the back half of the chassis and what goes on over there, you could take these faux engine halves off just by removing 3 screws in the bottom and then maneuvering that panel out of the way so you can see the diff casing in the back, for example. Another thing that is an important innovation, I think, compared to the previous Rey vehicles that have been released is the battery placement. So right now you have a battery that is placed right next to the ESC, and you can just simply clamp your battery down into the chassis, put a body clip in there. If you're afraid that it will slide around a tiny bit, I'm for example running these 5000 milliamp 3S Gens Ace batteries that are a tiny bit narrow. You can put this clip in. This comes in the spare parts bag or in the accessories bag with the needed hardware, and you can just bolt this to the chassis and call it done. 3 differentials and all of them being open. There's not a lot of lock going on over here, and there's also, if you lose traction on one wheel, it will just sit. If you want to mess around with that a tiny bit, which I will, there is plenty of opportunity to do so. So I am going to experiment in the coming weeks with some thicker diff oils to see if I can create some more lock, make this more of a trail capable vehicle, because that's where I see the most of the times, especially in videos, and I want to replicate those type of videos. I will also make sure that I can get my hands on a 1 to 6.7 scaled cooler with 1.67 scale Mountain Dew and Red Bull and Monster to put in the back, so that can be spilled all over the place when I lose control on the uphill. Another thing that I would have perhaps liked to have seen is a censored motor setup, just because that gives you some more bottom end control. There are plenty of censored motor setups that would fit in here, and I will experiment with that a tiny bit as well, just to have some more realism on the low end of the RPMs. Alright, time for me to charge a battery, take this thing out onto what is still a pretty snowy forest trail and see what this can do. This parts pile is, I think, a really important step forward in what will be able to be built in the years ahead over at Losi. We're not just talking like a 2-seater Turbo R, 2-seater Pro R, especially if this Polaris licensing continues. We're talking 4-seaters in both of those vehicles. There's just a lot of cool stuff possible in a trailed suspension setup that has radius arms. In the next video, I'm going to compare this to my homemade conversion, which is the Losi Polaris Rey. That thing is basically a hammer ray with a Fireteam Cajun body on it, and I worked on that for a couple of weeks just to see what I could come up with and what I could create ahead of this thing being available. So perhaps you want to see how that one stacks up to this all-new Losi RZR Rey. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to press the like button before you leave, because that greatly helps the channel in the analytics. If you have any questions or comments, stuff you want me to compare it to, or stuff you want to see side by side to this Losi RZR Rey, let me know in the comment section. If you've not subscribed yet, please do, because it is free. Links to this vehicle can be found in the video description box. And I hope I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.
Back on.